A very good morning to all our viewers and evening too. Today we have with us a very talented professional who switched from mainstream financial industry, having 35 years career in investment banking and asset management, wherein he also co-founded an investment bank into impact investing. He has been working on a very sensitive project, and he's the chair of the board of directors at the BOMA Project, which is a nexus of four UN SDGs, including ending poverty, eradicating hunger, combating gender inequality, and mitigating the effects of climate change. He primarily focuses on on South Africa, on the marginal communities. He holds an MA in International Relations from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, MBA from Dartmouth College, and AD in Economics from Stanford University, along with a CFA designation. Let us all give a very big round of applause and welcome to Mr. Perry Boyle. Um, Thank you for joining us. It's an honor to have you with us.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, you have had a focus in the mainstream finance and pursued entrepreneurship and now impact investment. Presently, you're contributing to impact ventures. Now, how has your journey been and what led to the shift towards impact investments?
Yeah, so my career was largely in the markets, largely the equity markets in the United States and globally. I started out at an investment bank in New York called Solomon Brothers, and then I went back to school. I did a little boutique merchant bank, and then I kind of shifted gears to the equity markets at an old firm, one of the oldest firms in the United States called Alex Brown. It's now part of Deutsche Bank. And I was a equity stock analyst there, and I really liked it. I covered the transportation industry. I did that for about 6 years, and then we got bought by Bankers Trust, and then we got bought by Deutsche Bank, and then it felt time to leave. The culture had changed, so I helped start up a new investment bank called Thomas Weisel Partners in 1999, and we grew that to be the 12th largest investment bank in the United States in about 2 years. It was the fastest ramp to 500 million in revenues of any company, I think. And I think that record might still stand. Did that for 6 years, then shifted to the buy side, to a hedge fund where I worked for 15 years, originally as a director of research. And then over time, I ended up managing all the long short equity portfolio managers and teams. We had about 100 of them globally. I helped open offices in Hong Kong, Singapore, Tokyo, London. I had to open it 3 times. We didn't quite get that one right. Finally did. And then we operated in New York and in San Francisco as well. So right now, that hedge fund's about 30 billion in AUM. We were about 16, I think, when I left it. I retired from that in 2020, just as the pandemic was starting. And I knew that I would be leaving. I was looking to leave to try something different, to try something a little more socially useful. So I'd spent about a year looking at the world, trying to figure out what could little old me figure out how to move the needle a little bit on the planet. And I came up with the issue of starvation level poverty. The planet grows 50% more food than we consume. So it's not a capacity issue, it's a systems and distribution issue. And that's kind of what my skill set lies in. And I got very lucky. I heard a woman speak about a small nonprofit NGO she had in East Africa called the BOMA Project, where she was giving people a hand up rather than a handout, where she was teaching the poorest women in the hardest to reach places how to run small businesses so they would have their own money and therefore a lot more agency. And it was working really well. I joined the board. Then I took over as vice chair. Then I took over as chairman about 6 years ago. And my view on this is that there are so few interventions that actually work that when you find one, you're kind of obligated to grow it as fast as possible. So we really exist to reach the people we haven't reached yet. Um, and our budget has more than quintupled since I took over as chair. We started in a base in Kenya, in 5 counties in Kenya. Now we're in 11 counties in Kenya. We're in Ethiopia. We're in Chad. We're in Uganda, and we're doing a little work in Burkina Faso as well. So that's really what I'm focused on right now in my personal life. And then, I did do pretty well in the hedge fund, and I've taken my savings and I invest that in largely impact investments, things like environmental remediation, things like a novel blood delivery system to trauma sites. There's a variety of things in there, and if we want to talk about that, we can talk about that. So that's kind of how I balance my life between BOMA and some private impact investing.
That's a very interesting journey, I must say that, and very inspiring too. Now, as the principal of Fox Holdings, you've been in impact investing and you've invested from real estate to technology and other domains. What are the key indicators that you look in a business while you are doing impact investing?
Well, first of all, I look for the person. Um, I'm doing seed level investing. So finding a person who has a passion for some unmet need is really critical. And there's a ton of ideas, but the value is in the execution. And you have to find someone who can execute. So, as an example, we have a great shortage of mental health care professionals in the United States, and access to them is quite limited. I live in a very rural area. I think we have maybe one therapist for 25,000 people. Like um, it's very poorly distributed. Online through the internet is a perfect delivery channel for a lot of that. So a woman named Colleen Hilton founded a company called Ally Connect, where she signed up 12,000 therapists, and she is focused on providing mental health support to first responders, to policemen, to firemen, to people who serve the public, who have gone through traumatic experiences. So that's just one example. Another example is I invested in a company called Delta Development, where it was founded by some special forces people from the U.S. military who were tired of seeing their friends dying on the front line for lack of blood, and so they developed a novel cooler and warmer that can bring blood right to the trauma site. So it can keep blood cool for a week, and yet it can warm it to the appropriate temperature at the appropriate time. And they've got backing from the U.S. Air Force. For that one I was a little skeptical about, because what do soldiers know about healthcare and business and manufacturing? And so I spent a lot of time on due diligence with them, and they are very committed to the mission and have done just a phenomenal job. So those are the kinds of things I think about. Oh, housing. Yeah, the real estate that I invest in is generally workforce housing. Um, I think many people live in countries today with acute housing shortages. Housing affordability in the US has almost never been worse than it is today. So we need to build a lot of units of housing, but it needs to be housing that a working person can actually afford to either buy or rent. Um, I've done this in cities, so the Bronx, Houston, um, and I've done it locally in my little town in rural Idaho. It's a national problem, it's an international problem right now, and we're going to need to put a lot more resources into that.
Yes, and I believe it could be very well replicated in other parts of the world.
Yes. Well, In the US, there are certain government programs that are um, very difficult to access. But there are some novel ways to use the tax code to do this in a tax efficient manner that reduces the cost by up to 30%. And that's a pretty significant savings in building housing.
Indeed, indeed. That's very insightful. Now, you are investing in so many different kind of projects. How do you measure the
Oh,
impact of the impact
yeah.
ventures?
So well, I didn't even finish your first question. I said, how do you select them? What are the criteria? And the
Yeah,
criteria are that it's a founder who has their skin in the game, who has a socially useful mission that can generate a return on the investment. And the goal is to recycle the money you make on one investment into the next investment. Um, I'm really trying to make a return in my investing because then I use that return to fund my philanthropy. I don't believe that business is philanthropy necessarily, and maybe we can talk about that. Um, I'm looking for things that aren't correlated with the U.S. stock market because that's kind of the benchmark. Um, and I have a long term investment horizon, 10 years or more. So I'm not looking for liquidity per se. Um, I'm looking for areas that I either know something about or people that I know. So I know a lot about networks. I know from transportation. So I've looked a lot at energy. I haven't found something that I can do at my scale in energy, but I'm very interested in things like microgrids and things like that. Um, I I understand distribution, um, and I spent my career really focusing on human systems. So how to organize people to accomplish a goal, and I have certain thoughts about that might be useful to talk about as well. But so I've done things in housing. I've done things in um, haven't done anything in transportation yet. I've done things. Oh, environmental remediation. So in BOMA, we work in the arid lands, and I can see the impact of desertification. One of the companies I've invested in is called Dendra Systems, founded by an Australian woman to remediate strip mining. And historically, mines have been replanted with just whatever was cheapest and not respectful of a biome that needed to be replaced. So, having biodiversity of plants to attract the diversity of animals. And she has a system using certain kinds of seeds and fertilizers and drones and satellite imagery to figure out what is the optimal mix within reseeding an area and with kind of a 20-year horizon. So that kind of thing is very interesting to me as well.
but how do you measure their impact?
Oh, how do I measure the impact? Hmm, that is the challenge. So when you're doing it for investing, the impact is measured in return on investment, but how do you measure the social impact? Um, and I don't have a great methodology for that, other than that it just seems to be obvious that something is creating more good than harm. Um, for Delta Dental, we can measure it in terms of lives saved. In terms of uh, dendra systems, we can measure it in terms of acres remediated. So each one has kind of a unique thing. In housing, it's how many people are housed. You know, so each one it's fairly obvious what what the impact is going to be. Um, but when let's switch back for a second though to BOMA because that was a really challenging aspect of it for me, coming from business to nonprofit world. How do you know a nonprofit is doing more good than it is harm? Well, is it locally led or is it imposed from outside? Is it something people ask for or something that is people are made to do? Is it the acid test for me is when you when you conduct an intervention and then you leave the area 5 years later, can you tell that you were there? So, for example, if you build a school in a certain area and then you leave, and 5 years later, the school might not be there anymore, right? So, how do you create the system to make sure that that can self replicate? What I found so impressive about BOMA, and the key thing that I looked at that really hooked me was 5 year BOMA is a 2 year intervention. 5 years after BOMA has left an area, 80% of the businesses it helps start up are still running. That the savings of the women is 3 to 10 times greater than it was before BOMA was in an area. That the percentage of children going to school is up 300%. That the amount of the number of children going without a meal, at least one meal a day, drops dramatically. So, and we have nothing to do with that. Like, we teach the women something, we help them unlock what's already inside themselves and get out of their way. And it's really quite remarkable to see the transformation.
That's very inspiring. And which project in BOMA do you think could be replicated elsewhere also? Because there could be the similar kind of challenges in other parts of the world.
That's true. So, um, if you look at Africa, it's the only continent with a growing population. It's the only continent where the percentage of the population living in ultra poverty is growing, both as an absolute number and as a percentage of the overall population. So if you go to a major city in Africa, it's pretty nice. They've got Starbucks and Ubers, and it feels pretty international. You go 2 hours into the countryside, and it feels like nothing has changed in thousands of years almost. So um, we know that there are about 400 million people in Africa who are food insecure. About 100 million of those live as nomadic, semi nomadic pastoralists. BOMA has created a program for that population, that the 100 million nomadic pastoralists. These are people whose livelihood is primarily based on livestock, where women are sold into marriage when they uh, reach puberty. So if there was a school, they have to drop out. I've never met a woman in a BOMA area who has less than 5 children. So and they have very little sense of what their own personal capabilities are. When we go into an area, we ask the village, do you want what we do? Most seem to want it. And we take the poorest women in that village and teach them how to breed goats or raise chickens or run a cell phone recharging business. These are not very complicated businesses, but these people have not had the benefits of education, so their literacy and numeracy is quite limited. Um, in Africa, it is very hard to save money. Once you have accumulated any savings, you are obligated to share it with your community, from your family to your community. So, very hard to create capital for capital investment. And so the cycle of this poverty kind of perpetuates. But if we can teach these women how to, and we have about 90% success rate in teaching the women how to run a business. Once they have their own money, their sense of self changes. They see themselves as much more powerful. They see that their voice has value. They stop deferring to others and rely more on their own decision making capabilities. Um, Practices like FGM, female genital mutilation, decline, even though that's not specific aspect of our program. Um, it, it's it's we are essentially keeping a young person in school longer. Like we're teaching them how to run a business. It's a form of education, and that is empowering to them. Um, in some areas where we have worked, the wealthiest people in the community are the women who went through the BOMA program. In some of the livestock markets in Kenya, um, up to 40% of the traders are women who went through the BOMA program. And what's really gratifying for me to see is if you ask a BOMA woman what what she wants now, she says, "I don't need anything. I want you to do this for my sisters." And that is really, really rewarding emotionally. So we help these businesses form little local savings groups. We take 8 to 10 businesses, we form a little mutual bank, if you will, and they lend money out to each other and they lend money to their community. But it's also been interesting to see them create collective businesses. So in Kenya, for example, school is nominally free, but you need a uniform and you need to buy your own books. So it's not really free. But we have seen some women groups um, pool their savings to buy a sewing machine to sew school uniforms. They were sewing masks during COVID. They'll sew backpacks for their children's. And that is a form of capital investment. That sewing machine is a capital good that they then use to create um, higher value add products over rather than just subsistence agriculture. And this is a necessary path of sustainable economic development. Um, and my dream is for this to go viral, that BOMA won't need to be the catalyst in these communities, that BOMA women, people who've been through the program, will train other women in what they learned. And we have seen that. I was in one savings group, a woman, some of the women in the group would not engage with me, which is unusual. And I thought, oh, maybe they think I'm sick or they're sick and they don't want to get me sick. And the woman said, no, no, they didn't go through BOMA. And I said, well, wait a second, they're in the BOMA savings group. And she said, yeah, but they didn't do the program. I said, but they have businesses. And she said, yes, they have businesses. Well, who taught them how to run a business? I did. Now that's the acme, that's the pinnacle. That if we can make that happen or help people make that happen, then our work is done. And the goal for BOMA is to be out of business. um, that would be awesome.
It's a multiplier effect. You see, you teach one, and uh,
Exactly.
it's really nice.
Yes. But there are many businesses that go into rural Africa that are this multi level kind of marketing thing, but they take money out of the community. So you'll see, like, one woman will do really well by selling other women cosmetics, say, which they don't really need. It's not sustainable. Um, it preys on insecurities. And that one woman does very well, but it doesn't bring money into the community. It takes money out of the community. But if you do things like help women breed goats or collect honey that gets sold outside of the community, that brings money into the community. And we're going to need to find a lot more livelihoods like that.
For sure, for sure. Now, Africa, as you mentioned, is the richest country in terms of minerals in the world. And still, as you again mentioned, it is the most poverty-stricken country. What are your thoughts on the same? What could be the reason, and how could that story change?
Well, we have a model for poverty mitigation, and poverty mitigation is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number one. And I think they made it number one for a reason, because if you can mitigate poverty, all sorts of positive things happen. But we have a model for poverty mitigation from Asia. Um, China, the Communist Party of China, did lift 700 million people out of abject poverty in 2 generations. And that's the source of its legitimacy. Um, India and Bangladesh have made massive strides in poverty mitigation. And so, what did they do? It's not that complicated a formula. There's 3 key legs to the stool. One is education, the second is livelihoods, and the third is um, uh, reproductive health, such that reproduction rates drop towards 2. We know 2.1 is sustainable population. And in countries that have population pressures, so for example, rural Africa, the fertility rate is about 5 and is coming down very slowly. So we have this model from Asia that we can help introduce into Africa and help Africa understand um, and work on itself. So keeping a girl in school till she's 18 is probably one of the single best things we can do for the planet, because that gives her far more agency about her own reproduction, about the choices for her children, about the choices for herself. And I think more and more work should be put into that area. Um, Rural Africa, the average age of the population is dropping. So the average age in Kenya is now 19. In Uganda, it's 16. In Mali, it's 14. So let's just think about that for a second. So in Mali, average age 14, half of those are boys who have almost no prospect of an education, who have almost no prospect of a livelihood, who won't be able to save enough money to start a family. So when Al Shabaab or Boko Haram or one of these radical groups comes through and says, "Hey, I'll give you a gun and a meal and a purpose," um, even if they're not religiously radicalized, that sounds like a pretty attractive deal compared to just literally sitting around and doing very little. And we need to help African countries with this fundamental job creation. If population growth exceeds the ability of an economy to create jobs, that is a recipe for instability. And there are multiple ways to do that, but we at BOMA, we actually have a specific program for this. We call it SEED, where we are teaching youth how to run businesses in the peri-urban areas. So just outside of a city limit, for example. Teaching boys how to repair motorbikes is a great one, or run a boda business, which is a motorbike transportation, like a Uber type thing. Give them something to do where they can make money and take care of themselves and their families. Without that, I really despair for rural Africa.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, Now, moving on to my next question. Now, at Dragonfly, as you mentioned, you also invest in renewable
Yes.
energies. Yeah, at Dragonfly Energy, you're working on that,
Well, that's a great
and which,
example. Yeah. Hmm.
yeah, it includes solar as well as wind energy.
Yes.
Now, you are working on storage of renewable energy, and how do you see battery storage contributing to fight global
Yeah.
warming?
Yes. So there are some fables we tell ourselves about renewable energy, that it will lower the price of electricity because wind is free and sun is free. Well, that is true when the sun shines and the wind blows. Um, Without storage, renewables will not be successful. So there's multiple kinds of storage. Batteries are one aspect. It could be pumped hydro, it could be gravity systems, whatever. But um, so I was asked to join the board of a battery company. I don't typically sit on boards because it's too time consuming, but I wanted to learn about the the um, the storage aspect of the green electrical economy, and it's pretty complicated. There are more kinds of batteries than I thought. Um, the properties of batteries are quite different. Utility scale storage is a massive challenge. So we are seeing utility scale storage lithium battery complexes go in, but the amount of power that they can store is very limited. Maybe they have 4 hours of energy for a grid. So if the power goes out for 2 days, those battery storage things, they're good for the first 4 hours. And we're going to need new kinds of battery technology that have um, uh, greater storage capacity per cost of unit of storage. What's nice about utility scale storage is energy density isn't the primary um, constraint. So you can build a very large solar field and on top of a very large battery farm, if you will, and that would work just fine. So you don't space isn't really as much of a constraint. So we're seeing new technologies using iron instead of lithium, for example, much cheaper. Iron's much cheaper than lithium. Um, then in terms of lithium batteries, we're seeing the dangers of batteries. So we see cars catch on fire. We see e-bikes catch on fire because the electrolyte in many of these batteries is inherently unstable. If you can create a solid state battery, those batteries are inherently non-flammable. So that there's a lot of R&D going into that area, and Dragonfly Energy has 26 patents on solid state batteries. So like a battery into a cell phone, you hear about cell phones spontaneously catching on fire. We can eliminate that risk. And solid state batteries have great storage capacity, great battery life, great power modulation. It's all good. Battery applications are much broader, I think, than people may perceive. So in the US, we use storage batteries for electricity in many common applications. RVs, recreational vehicles. Those lights are powered by batteries. Boats, their lights are powered by batteries. Not in trucks, though. Why is that? If you think about it, a long haul truck is kind of like an RV. The driver sleeps in the back, there's a microwave, there's a heater, and they idle their engines burning diesel to keep their power systems running. Why not put a battery in there? It saves energy, saves cost, it saves greenhouse gases. I think you're going to see a lot of electrification in the transportation industry beyond fully electrified trucks. Full electrification of vehicles is going to be a massive challenge, and I'm not sure we have enough minerals to do that. But hybrid forms, I think we're going to see an increasing penetration of. So that's why I
So,
joined the board of Dragonfly Energy, is I wanted to learn more about battery technology and battery applications. And one of the challenges of Dragonfly is our initial market was the RV market, and the RV market cratered after COVID because um, a lot of demand had been pulled forward. And now with interest rates rising, people aren't that eager to buy RVs. So Dragonfly Energy stock is pretty depressed, but it's an interesting long-term play.
so my question to you on this is, once a battery um, is is in the end of its life,
Yes.
what do you do after that to the battery?
Well, we're going to have to create a recycling system. So, and we are. Um, the, um, Dragonfly is based in Nevada. Nevada is a battery state. It's a state with a lot of lithium. It's a state with a lot of battery manufacturing, a lot of battery technology at its universities, and they are working on closed cell systems, so distribution systems, so the battery comes back to the manufacturer for remanufacturing. And we can definitely do that. It's just creating enough penetration of a market so that the economics of the distribution are such that we can recollect the batteries. Uh, but the technology totally exists to reuse almost all the components of a battery. Um,
Yeah.
Now, one of the challenges is that China knows this, and China doesn't want people recycling batteries because they're so that's where most of the battery cells come from. So they're doing a great job at keeping prices of de novo batteries very low to discourage battery recycling economics. That will change over time, I think. Though.
Yeah, like in India, most of the companies are moving towards becoming net zero. I believe that the same may be there in other companies all over the world. I know we've already completed half an hour. I just have
Yeah.
one more question. Your outlook for impact investors and entrepreneurs for the coming 5 years, and IICSR is a dedicated research and development and training institute for developing responsible business leaders. What are the knowledge gaps we could bridge to accelerate impact ventures and investments?
Yep. Well, that's a lot of questions. Um, the there are so in many of these new green industries, there aren't enough skilled people. President Biden just last week announced, or maybe just this week, announced, no, it was last week, announced a new American um, clean energy corps, 20,000 people to train into green energy jobs. Um, Take the nuclear industry, which I know is very big in India. There aren't enough people trained in nuclear engineering to staff all the nuclear power plants that are on the boards. Um, People, um, there are a lot of opportunities to get into these new areas. I think areas like robotics and artificial intelligence will impact every aspect of manufacturing, and so I would encourage people to study those areas. Um, I do think in net zero, there's a lot of room for improving the metrics of net zero. Um, Greenwashing is going to be illegal in the European community in 2026. People are going to need to be able to substantiate their claims of that they are moving to net zero. Carbon credits are a market that is going to have to evolve because that has been a primary area for greenwashing. Um, I think, though, that it's created a model for other types of credits, such as um, biodiversity credits, you know, ocean health credits. Like I think there's other credit markets that can create incentives for companies and people to do the right thing. One of the really interesting things about impact investing is, as you mentioned, how do you measure the outcomes? And um, there's a really interesting startup called Outcomes X, run by Phyllis Costanza, that um, where you basically buy specific outcomes. So if you want to house a certain number of people, or put a certain number of people in jobs, or remediate a certain amount of acreage, that's an exchange for doing that. And I think we're going to see more of that. And um, I think we're going to see more hybrid models where things start out as philanthropies and then turn into businesses. An example of that would be Sanergy in Kibera in Nairobi, where they created a closed loop system for human waste with cartridge toilets, where every aspect of the waste is used. either to breed flies for animal feed, and then even going into bricks for construction. Nothing is wasted, and that started out as a philanthropy, and now as a business, for-profit business. I know a lot of people think that impact investing, people shouldn't be making a profit on it. Well, I disagree with that strongly, because I think that that's how you attract capital into spaces, and we need a lot of capital to improve the world, to invest in green opportunities, to invest in impact opportunities. So, without a return on it, I think it'll be very limited, and um, but I'm just so excited about it. I mean, you can hear it in my voice. I hope. There's so much opportunity in the world right now, and I think with the internet, with artificial intelligence, with um, with uh, pretty open and free flowing capital markets, there are a lot of opportunities to find really interesting places to put your talents.
That's very interesting, and yeah, we look forward to making this into reality. I'm sure you will make it happen.
Yes.
Yeah. Perry, it has been a pleasure and an honor to have you on our show and learn so much from you. I know the time is never enough to learn from you. There's so much knowledge that you have and you've shared with all of us today. Any final message to all our viewers who are watching right now or who would watch the recorded session?
I would just say that we all have an obligation to leave the planet better than we found it. And, if we all took care of our own needs, and then the needs of one other person, the world would be an ideal place. And so I know that that's how you guys are all focused, and the world is becoming a better place for more and more of its inhabitants. And it's a great time to be able to put your talents to work. So thank you for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you. Our honor. Thank you.